college classroom, right? If the rule is 15 minutes. If you wait 15 minutes, you can leave and the professor can't hold it against you. By the way, I don't know any professor in the world who ever agreed to that. It's a bubba. The students did it. The students are revolting. All right.
How do you mean revolting?
Yeah, you're not so nice yourself, right? Okay, so we did Darash Rava, my dichtiv. Rava says, what is the meaning of Shir Shirim when it says, I went down to the garden of nut trees to look at the green plants of the streams, etc.? Lama nim shalu talmidei chachamim le'egoz, why are Torah scholars compared to a nut tree? Lomar lecha, to teach you, ma egoz ze af al pi shemiluchlach betit uvitzo'ah, even though a nut which is found amid the filth of the mud and the dung under the tree, ein ma shebatocho nim'as, that which is in never becomes repulsive. So what is that metaphor for Elisha ben Abuya? If Talmidei Chachamim are nuts that can fall off the tree into the goat poop down below and not be ruined, then
he still has Torah inside him,
right? The fruit of the nut is still pure, even if the outside has been covered in shit. All right? That's so. In your packet, we will now find it. 15. What are the first words on the page in English?
Well, the next page,
There's a double page like this that has, in English, that has the top left corner says 15b, and the top right says 15b with a handwritten 13. Okay? So you should be in the middle here. This is a double English page. It's the only page that has no Hebrew, and it has Rabbah expounded. You're pointing right at it. Okay? That's the paragraph that I'm just reviewing, and then we're going to move to the right-hand side and pick up with new material. Okay? So Rabbah expounded why the nut. Okay? And even though he sours, the Torah does not become repulsive. So now we're going to get, we're pursuing the question. What's the question at this point in the Talmud? What are we pursuing?
Can a righteous man go to heaven?
Can a righteous man go to heaven was the question.
After he sinned, like Acher did.
So we had Acher, who couldn't do tshuva in his lifetime, and after he died, couldn't redeem himself by the merit of his own Torah. But what happened in the Midrash Haggadah, in the legend that came in the Talmud here, after he died, two different rabbis tried to save him. Rabbi Meir, who was his advocate in life, tried to be his advocate in death, and he got what?
Smoke.
He got the smoke to come up out of the grave, for which he was criticized. Congratulations, he's not in what you called limbo anymore. Now he's actually in burning Gehenna. Nice job you did for your teacher. Rabbi Yochanan comes in and he says, by the strength of might, by the power of Grayskull, if you remember He-Man, Master of the Universe, or whatever the invoking term is for some superhero, right? When twin powers activate? I don't know which shows you watched as kids in the 70s, maybe none. He has this thing, by the power of a Talmid Chacham, we can redeem anybody. I could go and I can grab him. And when he dies, he goes and the smoke stops. And from this we learn that he actually got him into Gan Eden or Olam Haba, and not that he put him back in limbo. Because before no smoke meant limbo. Right. Evidently now no smoke means better than limbo. Right? From our point of view, it's impossible to tell. So those two stories happened. But then the question is raised, you learn from Talmidei Chachamim, and then Rabbi Meir was impinged. Do you remember that? So there was a criticism that you can't learn, like Rabbi Meir's Torah had become suspect. Why? Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu was studying and reciting these Baraito, these rabbinic teachings all day long, except for Rabbi Meir. Why? Because Rabbi Meir had learned from Elisha ben Abuya. So then we have the secondary question that gets brought back. Even though Yochanan, through his Talmud and Torah learning, had been able, evidently, to redeem Acher after his death, the teaching and learning of his Torah is not necessarily done. We would think because the teaching of Rabbi Meir's Torah has been diminished, which is astounding, right? Because what's wrong with Rabbi Meir?
Nothing.
He followed him on a horse on Shabbos, but he didn't break a halacha. He was in the presence of him while he went and got condemned by all these kids in the Batei Midrash, but he didn't do anything wrong. He was trying to get him to do tshuva. He kept saying, you can do tshuva, you can do tshuva, you can do tshuva. And God kept proving Rabbi Meir wrong. Right? So what's the problem with Rabbi Meir? And this is where we get really uncomfortable. So we're pursuing that. That's the question. Can you learn Torah from an Epicurus? From a heretic? I assume you've all said yes, that's why you're here.
But I mean, Rabbi Meir was condemned because smoke rose from Acher's grave. But before Rabbi Meir did, he said, if I succeed, you will see smoke rise from his grave. So he succeeded.
Right, but then that was called into question. Why would the grave be a place of burning smoke? Isn't that Gehenna?
Right.
Right? So
why would Rabbi Meir want that?
which is the criticism. Like Rabbi Meir, you now took him and you put him in burning flames. This is a good favor you did for him. That's basically what the Talmud says. It's an agadata. It's not a manual for how to use your microwave. It's an agadata. It's a story. It's a legend. It doesn't have to have happened that way. It doesn't need to make sense. It has a component to it which will teach some form of either a truth or an utz. It's an utz.
What's this, a potato chip?
It's a zetz, right? Is that better?
Yeah.
All right. So no, you should make spicy potato chips as zetz. Regular ones are an utz, and the spicy ones are a zetz. So the Agadata is coming to poke you, to provoke you, and it's there to bring in Yochanan. Why is it there to bring in Yochanan? Because Yochanan's teaching that Torah scholarship is a superpower. It's a superpower in this world, and it's a superpower in the world to come. Right? That's what the Agadata is coming to teach you. And Elisha ben Abuya is a secondary prop in the story. He's dead. Right? Meir is the prop in the story. He's got some powers, but not the great powers. Right? But the fact that it's coming in the context of is Torah learned or taught by a heretic efficacious? Right? Can Darth Vader use the Force? Right? That's what's going on here. Or is it not to be touched the way he does it? Even if he's using the same power. It's just corrupted in him, and we shouldn't touch it, and it will corrupt you. That's what's going on here. Okay, so what's going to happen in the next story? Ashkeche Rabba Bar Shila Eliyahu. Oh, didn't we do this one?
No.
Okay, we had Eliyahu already once, though, didn't we? All right. So Rabba Bar Shila, he bumps into Elijah the prophet one day. It could happen. Amarle, Rav Shila says to Elijah, we did this. So this is the one where he says to Elijah, what's God doing all day long? And God is repeating the words of the sages, except for Rebbe Meir. And why? Because Rebbe Meir learned teachings from the mouth of Acher. That's what Elijah says about God. Amarli, he says to him, but wait a minute, Rebbe Meir, Rimon matzah, he finds the pomegranate, he eats the seeds and throws away the skins. He eats the fruit and throws away the seeds and the skins. And Elijah says that God has said, my son Meir says, at the time that a person suffers, the Shekhinah, what does it do? It is when the person's head is hurt, the Shekhinah's head is hurt. When the person's arm is hurt, the Shekhinah's arm is hurt. So God has empathy for our suffering, and if the Holy One is so pain, and the Holy One has, through Rabbi Meir, found some form of compassion, then how much more so for the blood of the righteous? So this doesn't really answer our question straight on. It's a related topic. And the topic is God has mercy and empathy when the evil cry out sincerely in pain or tshuva. So how much the more so if the righteous do? It's not exactly hitting the nail on the head. It could be used against what the Gemara has been saying up until this point. It could be used against the bat kol of God, saying that Acher doesn't get to do tshuva, because this seems to say that he has empathy for tshuva, even from the wicked. But Agadas do this. Stories, legends in the Talmud do this. They don't have to agree. They can teach opposite things. They're both interesting, they're both relative to the topic, so they both show up in the chapter together.
Could you just go expound a little bit on what Shekhinah?
The Shekhinah,
Yeah, what is that?
was is dos Shekhinah?
Yeah, what is that?
Shekhinah is God.
The Shekhinah is God, but it's not.
In you, but is it God in you? Is that, or?
No.
I mean, how is Shekhinah different?
Shekhinah, okay, so Shekhinah is an idea that has gone through historical development over time. The Shekhinah doesn't really exist as a separate entity in any biblical literature. In biblical literature, you have God shochein bamarom, God is dwelling on high, and you have shochein ba'arafel, dwelling in the cloud, and you have God who is shochein b'beit hamikdash, who is dwelling in the temple. So you have the word to be present, to dwell. The modern Hebrew word shekhinah is a neighborhood, or a shachein is a neighbor. It means to dwell close or to be present. Okay? So the immanence of God. So God's immanent presence, being there in the Beit HaMikdash, is in, if you want to make it a verb of dwelling, you take the root in Hebrew and you make it like kitiva is writing, halicha is walking, okay? Shekhinah is dwelling. It's a word that means dwell in the present tense in an ongoing way, dwelling. Okay, that's what the word Shekhinah means. So Shekhinah is actually a verb. It gets picked up now in rabbinic literature, in the Talmudic age and in the age of the classical Midrash, as a specific experience of God. An imminent, present experience of God. It's the part of God that we can experience here. Okay? So it was in the temple is destroyed. Where's the Shekhinah now? And the Shekhinah has gone into exile. Or the Shekhinah is wandering. The Shekhinah, you used to go to Jerusalem and you would be in the presence of the Shekhinah, the indwelling of God. Now that that's not there, where is that? The most common rabbinic answers are, when three people study Torah, the Shekhinah is there. When someone is praying with the sick, the Shekhinah is over the head of the sick person in the bed. So you have these ideas that there are things that we can do that act as attractions, lightning rods or receptors for the presence of God. And that when we do these things, right now what we are doing, the Shekhinah is here. What makes this different than an adult ed class at Essex County?
Studying Torah.
It's not Torah.
We're studying Torah as Jews in a faith community. That would be the Goyish way to describe it, right? The Shekhinah is here. When we study this, it's different than if you read a book about it, or if you go to a lecture about it. It's different, because what we do here has ourselves involved. We laugh, we smile, we joke, we're confused, we get vulnerable, we share ideas, we push it, we apply it to our lives. We come at it from the point of view that we're meeting God in this exercise, right? Even though the exercise, there's a passage in the Talmud that talks about whether or not afterbirth is parv. Parv. If you eat it, is it parv? Is it meat? Or is it something that comes out of the body? Is it like an egg? Or is it, I use that as my favorite example because it's an example of something that I find it highly unlikely that any of you will ever make that relevant in your lives.
It's straight.
But it's from a kosher animal.
Like
No, not human afterbirth.
Oh, no.
A cow's afterbirth.
Oh.
Like liver pate or something, It doesn't make it better though, does it? It just made it not crazy anymore. Okay? So when you get involved in studying those kinds of things, it's happening in a context of a life lived as a Jew, where it is somewhere out there within the system, even if it's not where I am today, but my study of it and my engagement of it is nevertheless clearly for us an engagement of religion and God and Torah and Israel and history and time and past and future, and all these things are in play. How can that be, especially with such an absolutely absurd topic for your own life? Because the Shekhinah is there. When we do, that's Shekhinah. Okay, now that goes through a further level of historical development with the intrusion of Kabbalah into Judaism, and I understand that that's a particular historical view of Kabbalah, which I'm presenting again, that not everybody agrees with, but when the Kabbalah literature comes into public hands, at the very least, whether or not it was being written at that time or simply revealed, large numbers of Jews who never talked about the Shekhinah in a mystical way talk about the Shekhinah in a mystical way when the books of Kabbalah become readily available. Okay? That's a pretty fair way to put it that keeps everybody in the tent. All right? So at that point, Shekhinah goes through a different change. And the Shekhinah there is the nethermost part of God in contact with human at the bottom of the system of Sefirot. So if you have 10 Sefirot with a shattered Godhead in the cosmos as a result of Tzimtzum at the time of creation, and we have all of this divinity trapped in the material world, and we have to try and move our kavanah and elevate our souls through a system of 10 divine realms, we can only access the bottom 3 of those in just the physical world. The upper 7 are supernal realms, but there are ways to access that system through the mystical regimens. The Shekhinah is the presence of God on the lowest of those, as if you were to say high and low, God being high and us being low, the most imminent, the closest. So Shekhinah also becomes a feminine aspect of God, because God is neither male nor female, but once you start breaking God apart into the shattered realms, you can have aspects of God that are unique, including male or female elements, and Shekhinah becomes like this almost female, compassionate, merciful, present side of God in the system of Sefirot. And in modern kind of crunchy philosophical pseudo-Kabbalistic Judaism, the Shekhinah plays a really big role. And it's been pulled up in some women's writings, some feminist Judaism spiritual exercises and explanations. You'll find it in some interpretations, even in Tu B'Shvat Seders or Haggadot, where there's different kind of commentaries going on, whether they're drawing from a mystical or a feminist or a literary view. People will be drawing on this other aspect of God that's not the classical commander God of Sinai. It's got this other feel to it that has developed in all these ways over time. It's a long answer to a short question. We are in rabbinic mode here. So we are not in the mystical mode. It's not that Shekhinah. We're not in the modern mode. It's not that Shekhinah. So it's a Shekhinah that is the imminent presence of the classical God of the temple after the temple is destroyed.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to divert on this, but...
You don't want to divert from my diversion? We might wind up where we're supposed to be.
I have heard the term Shekhinah in reference to Erev Shabbos, when the Shekhinah
Yeah.
arrives.
The Shekhinah arrives.
And we think of that as the spirit of God, don't we? Not the nethermost or the foremost or...
The spiritual presence of God, the indwelling, the most present aspect of God. That's fine. That's coming from Kabbalah, that particular view, because it's coming through Chassidut, which is Kabbalistic.
No, but I would think that 3 people learning Torah would be the same thing as 10 people davening Friday night.
Yes,
So
I agree.
It's a rabbinic.
I always pictured it.
The rabbis of the Mishnah don't talk about the Shekhinah showing up when they daven.
Oh,
They talk about it in Bikur Cholim, they talk about it in Talmud Torah, in places like that. They also talk about it as exile from the temple. What you're presenting is, remember, Kabbalat Shabbat is basically invented by the mystical rabbis of Tzfat.
I didn't know.
So the whole Kabbalat Shabbat service was introduced to the Siddur by the mystics of Tzfat, 14th century, 15th century, around that time. It doesn't exist in any earlier prayer books, and there's no record of saying Psalms on Friday afternoon before. So you do Mizmor Shir, the Kabbalat Shabbat that you do on Chol HaMoed, right? You don't do the Psalms in Lachadodi, you start right with the Psalm for Shabbat, and you do a Kaddish and Baruch Hu. That's what they would have done. Right? So the whole other kind of welcoming Shabbat, the Sabbath Queen, and all that kind of stuff, that did come into Judaism through mystical practices and has become normative Judaism. I do it in my home. I talk about Shekhinah coming into my home. Just because I see this as either it came into Judaism at that time or we became more popularly aware of it at that time. However it is, that's where it really shows up on a wide basis. But that's 500 years ago, 600 years ago.
remembers it well.
For us, people get insulted because I say something came into Judaism 600 years ago, and it's like it doesn't have any credibility. There are religions that aren't that old, Right? Okay. Fair enough. I don't know how we got to Shekhinah. That was you, Ron. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Okay, very good. Shmuel, by the way, I may have just done a kapara for something I did early in rabbinical school. I got a B on a paper that I wanted an A because the topic was the Shekhinah as a rabbinic theology, and the JTS professor wrote almost no red anywhere on the paper. He wrote basically everything you said is correct, but shows no understanding of historical development. B. So maybe I've just done a kapara for that. All right, the Gemara records a dialogue that bears upon the phenomenon of Torah scholars. This is what Schottenstein's commentary says. All right, Torah scholars who foul were beyond Elisha and beyond Meir. Shmuel, who wants to read this one? Samuel found Rav. I'm on 15b, the double English page on the right. Second paragraph, Samuel found Rav.
Judah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Samuel found Rav Judah leaning on the doorbolt, weeping. So he said to him, O keen scholar, wherefore dost thou weep? He replied, Is it a small thing that is written concerning the rabbis? Where is that counted? Where is he that weighed? Where is he that counted the towers? Where is he that counted? For they counted all the letters in the Torah. Where is he that weighed? For they weighed the light and the heavy in the Torah. Where is he that counted the towers? For they taught 300 halakha concerning a tower which flies in the air. And Reb Ami said, 300 questions did Doeg and Ahithophel raise concerning a tower which flies in the air. Yet we have learned 3 kings and 4 commoners have no share in the world to come. What then shall become of us, said Samuel to him. O keen scholar, there was impurity in their hearts. But what of Acher?
Okay, well, hang on. Before what of Acher, we have to figure out what the heck was that. Okay? So,
Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah.
Wherefore dost thou weep? It sounds like Shakespeare translated.
well, this is
Translated.
This is the original Sunsino. It's a British translation. It's the first complete English translation of the Talmud ever printed, and it's what we have in our library that takes the fewest number of pages to photocopy. I could do the Schottenstein, which goes back and forth between Hebrew and English, but the book in your hand would be about 8 times longer. So you're reading a British early 19th century translation of the Talmud. Or late 19th century, late 1800s, early 1900s. Okay? All right. So I'll give you another translation. This is the Schottenstein in front of us. It goes like this. Shmuel once came upon Rav Yehuda as he was leaning on the bolt of a doorway crying, and he said to him, Sharp one, why are you crying? He replied to him, Is that which is written regarding the rabbis inconsequential? Where is the one who can count? Where is the one who can weigh? Where is the one who can count the towers? Where is the one who can count? For they would count all the letters of the Torah. Where is the one who can weigh? For they would weigh all the kol v'chomers in the Torah. Where is the one who can count the towers? For they would teach 300 laws concerning a tower that floats in the air. And Rav Ami said, Doeg and Achitophel raised 300 inquiries concerning a tower that floats in the air. Yet we learned in a Mishnah, 3 kings and 4 commoners have no share in the world to come. As for us, what will befall us? He said to him, Sharp one, they had impure thoughts in their hearts. Now, that doesn't make it any more clear. right? Some of those are different words, slightly different choices, but let's kind of dig through it. So what happens? Shmuel sees Rav Yehuda leaning on the bolt in a doorway. So, if you have older doors or barns or garages, or you grew up in a more rural area, there's a bolt that you can throw across to close a door and hold it, instead of having, door handles and everything. That's how every door would have been in the ancient world. So when you talk about the bolt on a door and there's a rabbi involved, it's probably not just any old bolt in any old door. So you have to kind of take a guess. Where do you think he is?
In school, in synagogue.
My first guess would be like that as well. It's a Beit HaMidrash or Beit Knesset, probably Beit HaMidrash. So he's leaning on the bolt of the door, the thing that holds the door closed or secures the space within. A metaphorically ripe object, if ever there were one. Okay? So he's leaning on that item, and he's weeping. So if a rabbi is weeping on the thing that closes the study house door,
From the inside.
I don't know if he's from the
The
inside.
bolt has to be in the inside.
It could be on the outside.
Okay, then it would.
Well, it's not a lock, right? You have to be able to reach it from both sides to operate the door, right? Okay, fair enough. Unless it is meant to be keeping people out, which would be a different metaphor. I don't see that necessarily here. So then he says, sharp one. Sharp one meaning he's a really bright guy. I mean, you are super, super, super smart. How could you be crying and despairing over anything? Like, you know the answers to everything. Okay? And he says, why are you crying? Yudah says, is that which is written regarding these rabbis inconsequential? So whatever Torah verse he's about to bring, it's about some rabbis who evidently he needs to weep over. So what has our topic been to this point? Acher. Rabbis who fall off of the way and whether their Torah is still good. So I would start with that assumption. He's weeping over rabbis who have gone astray. Right? And he's asking, is that which was written regarding them of no consequence? Are they lost? Presumably the verse he's about to quote assures us of their protection or their worth or their value, or it's going to do the opposite. We haven't seen yet. We have to figure it out. So what's the verse? The verse is this. The verse is from Isaiah 33:18. Where is the one who can count? Where is the one who can weigh? Where is the one who can count the towers?
What towers is he talking about?
So we have to wait to figure that out. Okay? So now it's going to go through each of those and say what that is. So Isaiah's context doesn't matter. Right? Isaiah is talking about, the loss of the faithful and the powerful in the time of God's retribution and destruction, and saying, and he might have said, where are the libraries and where are the wise ones and where are the young happy people having children? He's saying, where is the one who can count? Where is the one who can weigh? Where is the one who can count the towers? Like, how can you add up all the things in life? Who can take an accounting of what has happened here? Who can measure what has happened here? Who can make sense of what has happened here? That's Isaiah's lament, right? And that's a little bit not related to what we're doing here. It's going to get used. So how's it going to get used? So we're going to go through each of those words, and this teaching is going to interpret each of those words. So we're going to go back to where is the one who can count? Who is that? That is for the rabbis who would count all the letters of the Torah. Okay? Which is an actual practice. The way you check as a scribe whether or not your Torah is kosher is you count the letters on the line, and then you count the letters on how many lines there are, and you count how many letters are in a parsha, and you don't actually let yourself read the parsha for accuracy, you count the letters. Because if you read the parsha for accuracy, you'll make a mistake. Maybe there's not a vav, there is a vav there. I know the sound is O. Sometimes there is a vav, sometimes there's not a vav. Reading it's not going to tell me that. But I know how many letters are supposed to be in that parsha if I'm a scribe, and so that will tell me if somewhere there's a vav missing or there's an extra vav. There's an extra letter somewhere, I have to go find it now. So that was a process of being a great a great Torah scholar, would be to know down to the number of letters in every parsha of every sedra of the entire Chumash. Okay? Where are those people? So that's somebody who is no more. So I think our theory about what he's talking about is holding up so far. What's the second lament? Where is the one who can weigh? For they could weigh all the kalin v'chamurin shebatorah. Kalin v'chamurin is kol v'chomer. So kol v'chomer is a phrase that the rabbis use, which means from a simple case, you learn the more difficult case. So if on Shabbos I'm not allowed to take something from warm to scalding, how much the more so I'm not allowed to take something from cold to scalding, right? It's a measure of degree. I make logic out of it. I've got a case like this. It's a simple case. A more strict case is going to be more obviously that. It's a basic logical principle in rabbinic interpretation. So kalin v'chamarim would be the plural of that. All of the simple and all of the difficult cases of the Torah. So let's make it sound right in the words. Where is the one who can weigh? They would weigh all the kol v'chomers in the Torah. So these are rabbis who knew all the letters of the Torah. These are rabbis who knew all the logic and law of the Torah. And then the last piece of the Isaiah quote, where is the one who can count the towers? For they would teach 300 laws concerning a tower that floats in the air. Don't worry. This sentence produces pages and pages and pages of arguments among the Rishonim and the Achronim about what the heck it means. Okay?
Where did it come from?
And where it comes from. And it goes on and on and on, and there's like 10 major different opinions about what this means. In my mind, having gone through some of it, I think that this is a Tahara and Tuma argument about a tower that leans and the dead body and whether or not the impure underneath the height of the tower, the air underneath the tower is impure like a tent. If you have a body in a tent, everything in the tent becomes impure. If your body in a room like this, everything in the room becomes impure. That's why Kohanim go to funerals and they sit in a different room, so they're not in the room with the body, right? Well, if it's not a room, if it's a tower and it's overhanging or a balcony, can they be under the balcony? Can they be in the tower? I think that's what that is. And it's such a complicated piece of halakha. Only a great Torah scholar would be able to teach 300 rules regarding a tower that hangs in the air. That's my best shot from the sources about what's being referred to here. There are other things. There are completely different things. For our purposes, it doesn't matter. What we're seeing here is that this is a third piece of the Isaiah verse being interpreted as there used to be great scholars and now they're gone. Okay? What in this third example made them great scholars? I think that counting letters is easy, kol v'chomers is hard, and the laws I just referred to are spectacularly difficult. So there's an increase in the impressiveness of the missing rabbis in this. Okay? Everyone with me?
Yep.
Okay, so Rav Ami says, in response to that, Doeg and Achitofel. All right, so who are Doeg and Achitofel? This is like the final Jeopardy round at the end of Torah Jeopardy question. Doeg was an advisor to King Saul who slandered King David before David was king. Okay? And Achitofel was a good guy who was an advisor to David. So Doeg is like the evil advisor whispering in the ear. Who was the Shakespearean character?
Yago.
Yeah, that's him. That's Doeg. And then the good advisor is Achitofel. However, Achitofel, in the time of Avshalom's rebellion against his father, joined Avshalom. So these are both guys who had good, but went bad. Okay? Why is Ami bringing them up? He says, Doeg and Achitofel raised 300 inquiries regarding a tower that floats in the air. All right?
No, not all right.
So maybe they were good Torah scholars before they went bad. Maybe they're on topic. But they both got what was coming to them. So they weren't forgiven.
That's the power of God.
So that could be Acher not being forgiven, right? So it is on topic. It just took us a while to get there, right? Now there are other ways to read this because it's obtuse, but I think that's the clearest for us. Yet we learned in a Mishnah, Utnan, Shlosha Malachim v'Arba Hediotot Ein Lahem Chelek Le'Olam Haba. If you haven't studied Mishnah Sanhedrin 10:1, you should. It's the famous line that Kol Yisrael Yesh Lahem Chelek Ba'Olam Haba. Everyone among the people of Israel has a place in the world to come. And then it says Chutz meh, except, and it names a bunch of people, okay, who don't get, even though they're Jews, they don't get the world to come. In other words, the bar for the world to come is evidently very low, but it's not an automatic pass. Okay? At least for us. It's the Mishnah by the year 200 of the Common Era. Okay? So they're quoting a Mishnah on this topic. So does Acher get into the world to come or not? Well, if he doesn't, he has to be as bad as those people. So this is on topic for us. Right? It doesn't mean you can learn Torah from him, necessarily, but it means he might get into the world to come. So Yochanan might have gotten him in, but it doesn't mean you can learn his Torah. So this is all really getting pushed in different ways with these different stories. That's the topic. Remember a few weeks ago I said this is going to be the common thread? Otherwise these are random stories. I don't think they're random. I think there is a common thread. So, who are they? By the way, the four commoners are Bilam, Doeg, Achitophel, and Gechazi. Okay? The Torah of such scholars like Doeg and Achitophel, who could do 300 questions about a tower in the air, didn't protect them from losing their place in the world to come. So Ami says, you just had this lament for where are the scholars who did all these things. So this is the rabbi crying on the bolts of the Beit HaMidrash. Some scholars are missing, and the great scholars of the past, and where have they all gone? And can they not be redeemed, right? And the answer from Rav Ami is, 300 halachas about a tower in the air. Doeg and Achitophel did that, and the Mishnah says they don't get into the world to come. Even though he doesn't quote that piece of the Mishnah, it's the second half of the line that he doesn't quote here. By the way, little aside, the Gemara does this all the time. They didn't leave off that other piece of the Mishnah to confound you. They left it off because they presumed you already know it by heart. And ink is expensive and parchment more so. And so the process, the process of writing a Talmud, when it was a manuscript tradition, was you only wrote the letters or words necessary to clarify the verse you're talking about. And then you immediately stopped and kept writing, because you've got to get through a lot, and you only have so much parchment, animal hide, and so much ink. And it's expensive. And it takes a long time. So they wrote enough of the Mishnah to know that it was the line that says Doeg and Achitophel and Bilam and Gechazi don't get in.
I don't understand why they picked Doeg and
Achitophel.
Yeah. Those are very obscure guys who were good who went bad. Couldn't he have found a better example?
You mean the Mishnah? Because these are the examples from Mishnah Chelek and Sanhedrin. So these are the rabbis of the Talmud quoting a Mishnah where they've already been told these four don't get in. So if you've got a problem with these four being the examples, you have to go back to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and say, why did you pick those four? Aren't they a little obscure?
So that was before Acher.
It was Acher was before Yehuda Nasi. Acher was before Yehuda Nasi. Yehuda Nasi then codifies the Mishnah. He does not put Acher in that list. He only puts biblical people in that list. And these are the four biblical figures, two of whom Rav Ami is now quoting. He can't say Bilam because Bilam wasn't a Torah scholar, and Gechazi wasn't a Torah.
Bilam wasn't Jewish.
Correct, right? And same thing with Gechazi. He was not a Torah scholar. He wasn't Jewish. He was a servant. So you have Doeg and Achitophel. I mean, they were right. For our purposes, Doeg and Achitophel are the two examples that fit the mold.
Okay. Are they mentioned in the Chumash?
Yeah, in the Tanakh, in Nevi'im, yes.
Oh, in Nevi'im.
In the book of Samuel. They're in Samuel. Okay? All right. So, 3 kings and 4 commoners have no share in the world to come, including these 2 guys who evidently could learn and teach 300 halachas about a tower in the air, and therefore they were brilliant scholars who went bad, and they did not get the world to come, even though they had this Torah scholarship in them. Ana ma tehevi alan, and therefore what fate will fall on us? So Ami is now crying right next to Rav Yehuda. So Rav finds Rav Yehudi crying on the bolts of the door, who wails this line. Ami comes in and says similar things. I have another example that fleshes that out. He says, and what will befall us? And Shanina, Shmuel says to him, sharp one, Tina haita bilibam. They had impure thoughts in their hearts, and that's why they didn't get into the world to come. So now you have to figure out, what does that mean? Why did Doeg and Achitophel not get in? Because even though they could figure out intellectually these 300 cases of the tower in the air, they had impure thoughts in their hearts from the beginning. They were treif on the inside.
So Jimmy Carter can't get in.
I sinned in my heart. I committed adultery in my heart.
What do you mean impure thoughts?
I don't know. Tina. It says Tina. They had impure thoughts. What can you do? It's not a clear agarata. It's not like B'mei Madlikin or something where it comes in and it tells you exactly what it's talking about, or Mai Chanukah. It's not. This is a complex thing. It's not clear. All right? But the tone of it is pretty clear that it's on our topic, because the Gemara comes in after presenting this convoluted thing and says, Acher Mai. So what's the case of Acher? And brings us right back to Elisha ben Abuya. Okay? So in other words, the editor of the Gemara has now gone and found a variety of legends that deal with the topic of a treif person who knows kosher Torah and what happens to that person in the end. Okay? They haven't all been the same. They're all mildly different. So now he's going to come back to Acher. So, if the Mai Acher is asking about this story, then you're going to have to find out what are the impure thoughts in Acher's heart. If it's Mai Acher on the bigger picture, then it might be, well, how did Acher ever get into the world to come, even with Rabbi Yochanan, if these verses show that once you're out, you're out? So it's not clear immediately which question is being asked. Immediate reaction to the last story or bigger picture. All right, so let's go on and see what it is. Who wants to read? Now that I saved you all from that, we're getting back to slightly more intelligible stuff. Yeah, go ahead, Ronnie.
Amos the Weaver asked Reb Meir, does all...
Oh no, I've got a Greek song.
Okay. Greek song did not cease from his mouth. It is told of Acher that when he used to rise to go to the schoolhouse, many heretical books used to fall from his lap.
Okay. Two things he's been accused of. One, he's constantly humming Greek songs. Right? So we're sitting in shul, and, it's time for Adon Olam, and he's singing it to Ooh Baby Baby. Right? Or he's just singing Ooh Baby Baby. He's like singing some Greek song, and that's not cool. What now, does that surprise us about Acher?
No, because he studied Greek literature. That was his main.
What was the thing? Yatsa le, he went out to, what's the phrase? Tarbut ra'ah, the evil culture.
Right.
He acculturated as a Greek.
Right.
That was the sin. So what's culture?
Well, so
Music, food, patterns of intimacy,
Books.
social association, ideas, literature, poetry, that's culture. So he acculturated within the Greek culture. So what did he do? So how do we know he had impure thoughts in his heart constantly? He was singing Greek songs. He never had a moment that a Greek song wasn't on his lips. And every time he stood up, Plato and Aristotle fell out of his pockets.
well, then studying Plato and Aristotle
Right?
on the slide.
Now, which one of those was true, Plato or Aristotle?
Neither. Although in the mouth of Rambam, Aristotle gets pretty close. In Rambam, Aristotle teaches Moses Torah truths, right? But it's not until we get to Rambam that somebody makes that happen. In the time of the rabbis, Aristo is a preeminent pagan Greek philosopher. And Epicurus, you know that word, where it comes from? It comes from Epicurean, which is a particular form of Greek philosophy at this time, one that has to do with fairly liberal social norms.
I thought it was good food. And Epicure.
Yes, people who are who appreciate as philosophically divine the pleasures of the body, among other things. Epicurean delights, right? So, all right. So, what has he done? Now, if we have to come up with a list of Achir's sins that we've learned to date, what are they?
Greek culture.
Songs,
Greek culture, Greek songs, Greek books, and the prostitute story.
Yes.
And maybe he chopped up a kid, but by then they had already condemned him.
You didn't shop.
We don't believe he chopped up a kid. He was just angry enough to do it. But he was already condemned by that point. The truth is, he was already condemned by the point he went to the prostitute. So you can't really hold that against him.
The original sin was the
So it's-
telling them about the angel that you're giving your.
Well, so we have the angel story, which would have blocked the angel recording the merits of Israel. So in some sense, I'd be mad at him too. It's like cutting the supply line for our defense forces. You're putting us at risk. But here is very different, right? Here is Greek.
Wasn't that might just? It's
By the way, Greek means Roman. Everyone knows that, right? Roman culture is Greek. The Romans spoke Greek. Everyone knows that? The Romans did not speak Latin.
they spoke.
Okay, they spoke Greek.
But it was. But I think they would say because of that original sin, he said, he gave up then, and that's maybe why he was, the other sins, or we don't know that.
He had something that he was condemned for, after which he went whole hog, quite literally. Okay? All right.
Rabbi, is part of this to try to encourage people not to assimilate?
Absolutely.
fraternize with the
Yeah, it's
enemy,
not
right?
very subtle, is it?
No.
Right.
Not at all.
Right. No, this is telling you that you shouldn't be. I mean, you think these stories don't have play in certain Jewish communities today?
Yeah.
This is why you shouldn't be listening to radio or going on the internet or reading books that don't have your rabbi's approval printed in the cover. It's exactly what this is. What's that? You shall not walk in their ways. Absolutely correct. But here we are talking English, wearing Western clothing. I'll go into each of your cars and push buttons and see what you've got pre-programmed on the radio. Right? 3 of mine are news stations, but there's some music in there. All right.
Nemos the weaver asked Reb Meir, does all wool that goes down into the dyeing kettle come up properly dyed? He replied, all that was clean on its mother comes up properly dyed. All that was not clean on its mother does not come up properly dyed.
Interesting. New metaphor. So, remember you're in a world where you would shear your own wool and you would comb it and you would clean it and then you would immerse it in dye and then you would spin the wool into thread. So they have a lot of laws that have to do with dyeing wool. It's one of the major categories of malacha on Shabbat. Actually, most people don't understand. Cooking is actually not one of the forbidden malachas. Boiling water, making coffee, the reason you're not allowed to do that is not because of fire and cooking meat. It's actually a derivative of heating dye, where you put the solid dye into the water and dissolved it and boiled it and cooked it so that you could dye clothing. The reason we're not allowed to boil water on Shabbos is because of the prohibition against making dye.
Now you're talking.
So that's just a little halacha lamase on the side. Doesn't matter why you're not prohibited. You knew you were prohibited. Don't do it.
So if a really Orthodox person or a super frum
Mhm.
wants to make coffee, has coffee, diluted coffee, and adds hot water to it, That's a problem on Shabbos, right?
Can you take pre-cooked diluted coffee essence and add boiling water into it? One could argue that's not permitted if you're worried about turning the water a color, but you're not turning the water a color. The objects that are in there that have been colored are colored. You're not coloring them for the first time. Water does not have a color. So you could not intentionally put, here's an interesting one. People use tea bags on Shabbos.
Some don't.
Does the tea stain the bag?
Stand
Does the white bag turn brown?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One could argue that that's actually a problem because the tea leaves in the hot water form a coloring agent and you color the bag. You could argue. I don't recommend that you do argue. But, you could run down that road. All right, here we are. Let's go back to our topic. Rabbi Meir replied to him, Kol man dahavanaki agam. Okay, so anything that was clean from the beginning. This is wool that came clean from the mother. It doesn't have schmutz. It doesn't have genetic defect or whatever in it that it's like some kind of warped, twisted, hard, insoluble, whatever. It's good wool from the mother, from the beginning. Right? FFB. It's from birth. Right? It comes from a good origin, and it goes into dye. It will always come out perfectly dyed. It will take the dye. But if it's corrupted from the time of its birth, it doesn't come from a good mother, then it won't necessarily take the dye so well. What does that mean? What in this metaphor, what's the wool and what's the dye?
The wool is the student and the dye is the Torah.
Correct. The wool is the person and the dye is the Torah. So if the wool comes from a good place of purity, it will take on Torah in a pure way. If the wool doesn't come from a place of purity, and it doesn't matter if it goes into the vat of Torah, it's not going to come out well dyed by the Torah. It will be an imperfect dyeing of the wool.
Meaning that if your parents were
It doesn't make any sense.
from, you have no chance.
So whether this extends to your actual literal birth or not, I'm not clear. But remember the story we just had was Doeg and Achitophel had impure thoughts from the beginning. So when they were learning and teaching Torah, they were not good wool. So the dye looked like it was taking, but it really wasn't. The analogy is being made to Acher, who always had Greek on his lips and Greek books in his lap. And so he was obviously not the kind of wool that can take the dye. Or you're going to have to refute this. You're going to say, but he was pure to begin with, and he only became corrupted later.
Right.
Why doesn't the wool take the dye for Acher? These are the arguments you can make.
You really don't know if Acher was pure.
We don't know where he came from.
Right.
We don't know anything about Abuya. Elisha ben Abuya. Right?
So he could-
We don't know. Sounds like a good name. Right? It's not like Elisha ben Platinicus or something. All right?
Steinberg says that Abuye was a heretic as well.
Abuya was it? So he's a heretic, the son of a heretic? That would solve the problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he points out, Rabbi Steinberg points out that the first.
This is in As a Driven Leaf?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. And he
Yeah.
points out that that section, the first page or two of his book, is based on sources or.
Okay. I make no claim to have read everything on this topic. So,
the book really follows all of this?
yes, it's fictionalized Talmud. So all the plot within that is plot gleaned from Talmud. But the personalization of the interactions of the people is often fiction. Okay.
You have, like, to teach us more literally, at this time, you would have people calling everybody else a heretic.
Yes.
They would be going
And they did.
in all directions.
And they did.
And they do.
It was a mess.
And they do.
And it is. And it is a mess. This is the normal human condition, evidently, especially within Judaism. The concept that there was a perfect time when everybody like happily davened in each other's shul and recognized one authority and the choirs on high sang in approval of us, I don't see that ever having happened. Judaism has always been a plurality of Judaisms within a common world and legacy. But there's always been variety of expression. The places where there have not been varieties of expression is where the community has been placed into kind of a crucible situation, like a medieval town where they live behind the wall, and they have an authority, and they have a town, and if they leave, they're going to die. Right? In those places, you get homogeneity. You get everybody's the same. But as soon as the Moroccan Jewish trader comes with a couple of books on the back of his wagon, trouble starts, because now people get ideas again, right? And that's the normative for us. That's the norm. That's why we have such a dynamic literature. That's why the Talmud isn't just the Mishnah, right? The reason Talmud is because of the variety of things that happened when we all have the same book, the Mishnah. The Mishnah doesn't produce one Judaism, right? Unless you call Talmud one Judaism, which you can, and you should. But to say Talmud is monolithic would be a gross misunderstanding of the world that it's telling us about, right? Okay, Rabbi Meir replied, clean, gets it, not clean, doesn't get it. Okay, and now the Baraita goes on.
Akiva went up unhurt and went down unhurt, and the then scripture says, draw me, we will run after thee. Rabbi Akiva too, the ministering angels sought to thrust away, but the Holy One thrust the key, said to them, let this elder be, for he is worthy to veil himself of my Lord.
Okay, so now we're going back to Rabbi Akiva, the beginning of the whole story.
The cemetery story.
The four who went to Pardes. The four who went to Pardes, right? So remember, he went in and he came out in peace. Allah b'shalom, yarad b'shalom. That's not the language of the original Mishnah. Allah b'shalom, yatsa b'shalom. But that's okay. So this Baraita is an alternative version of that story. And it's going to say, upon him, the verse says, draw me, we will run after you, which is from Shir HaShirim again. But Malachei Asharet lidochofo. So even he was in danger. The ministering angels tried to shove him out of Gan Eden. Even Rabbi Akiva. And there's lots of interesting interpretations why that is, beyond the scope of this class. Amar lahem hakadosh baruch hu, but God rebuked them. Henichu lezaken zeh, leave this old man. Lehishtamash b'chvodi, right? He is ra'ui lehishtamash b'chvodi. He is deserving, meritorious. He has a right to make use of my honor, to use my kavod. So he's invoking or using God's kavod, and the angels are trying to shove him away, and God says, this one has the right to use my kavod. So something about the kavod of God, which is the more common way to talk about the presence of God. In the Torah, you have the cloud comes down, and it says the kavod of God came down on the sanctuary. So in the Chumash, it's the kavod, not the Shekhinah. So you said you always pictured it as a cloud.
Yeah.
That's the kavod. The Shekhinah is usually not pictured as a cloud, but the kavod is. So this is a very early, much earlier source for the concept of the presence or the honor or the power of God. So Rabbi Akiva had access to the kavod of God.
Why didn't the others?
Don't know. One died, one went crazy, and the other turned into a heretic.
They
So
were all distinguished
I
scholars.
don't have their stories. I have Rabbi Akiva's story. Why? Because the Mishnah is a Rabbi Akiva document. Rabbi Akiva generates Hillel. Hillel generates Gamliel, and the line to Yehuda HaNasi and the Mishnah. So Rabbi Akiva is the hero of the Mishnah always, because it's his school of thought that results in the Mishnah. Okay? We should probably stop there, because we're going to get a big sermon by Rabbi Akiva next, and we don't have time. Okay, 16a, you made it to 16a.
Well, wait a minute, if that's the standard, a long sermon is following.
Advice of counsel, I don't respond. Invoking my Fifth Amendment rights. All right, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.